The first crack wasn't loud. It was clean. Claire's 21st birthday dinner was at one of those places in Austin where the lighting is soft on purpose and the menus don't list prices. Sarah picked it. Linen tablecloths, heavy silverware. A server who kept refilling water like it mattered. Claire wore a black dress and a small gold necklace I'd paid for without thinking twice. I sat to her right. Sarah sat across from me. Two of Claire's friends were there, plus her aunt. Enough people to make it feel official, like a milestone. Like a family. The cake had just been cleared when someone suggested a toast. Glasses lifted. Smiles turned on like switches. Claire stood slowly, not unsteady, not playful. She didn't look nervous. She looked prepared. She raised her glass and waited for the room to quiet down. My only real wish, she said, calm as a weather report, is for Michael to disappear from my life forever. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. Like my brain refused to accept a sentence that final in such a polite room. But the silence confirmed it. No one laughed. No one corrected her. The server froze near the edge of the table, holding a bottle like he'd walked into the wrong scene. I turned my eyes to Sarah. If anyone was going to flinch, it would be her. She didn't. Sarah just reached across the table and placed her hand over Claire's, steady and warm, the way you comfort a child who's said something difficult and true. Claire didn't look at me. She kept her glass raised until the moment passed, then set it down like she'd completed a task. And right there, with everyone watching and nobody objecting, I understood something with a strange, cold clarity. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a slip. There was no way back. Before that night, my life felt like something you could file and label. I ran operations for a mid-size commercial construction outfit on the north side of town. Early mornings, job site walks, subcontractor calls, schedules that lived and died by weather and inspections. I liked it because it was measurable. A slab either cured or it didn't. A change order either got signed or it didn't. When people said one thing and did another, the numbers showed it fast. At home, I built the same kind of order. Mortgage paid 2 weeks early. Insurance on autopay. A simple investment mix I didn't touch unless the quarterly statements told me to. I wasn't flashy. I didn't need to be. I'd come up without much, learned what stability costs, and I paid that cost every month without complaining. Claire's tuition was part of that structure. Not because anyone asked me in a touching way, but because it made sense. I was married to Sarah. Claire was Sarah's daughter. When we got serious, I stepped into the gaps that already existed. Textbooks, meal plan upgrades, the occasional, emergency, plane ticket when she didn't want to ride back with roommates. I didn't announce it. I didn't keep score out loud. I just covered what needed covering. That was the role, the background hum. The one who handled things so nobody else had to think about them. There wasn't open conflict. Not really. No screaming matches, no slammed doors. Just little shifts that were easy to rationalize if you liked peace the way I did. Claire's, "Thank you," started sounding like something she'd been trained to say. Sarah's affection grew formal, like a handshake that lasted a second too long. Conversations became updates. Claire's classes. Claire's plans. Claire's stress. My day was something I summarized the way you summarize traffic. I remember standing in the kitchen one evening, rinsing a coffee mug, listening to Sarah on the phone with Claire. Her voice changed when she talked to her, soft and warm, full of, "we," and "we'll figure it out." When she hung up, she looked at me and asked, "Can you transfer the money tonight?" She's freaking out. No, please. No context. Just a task dropped into my hands like a tool. Another time, Claire came home for a weekend and walked past me like I was furniture. She kissed her mom's cheek, dropped her bags, and started talking about a guy in her program. How driven he was, how creative, how different. I sat there, nodding, pretending I didn't notice she never once said my name. Sarah didn't either. It was small stuff. Death by paper cuts. And I kept doing what I always did. Smoothing edges, solving problems, keeping the machine running. I told myself it was temporary. That college made people weird. That Sarah was stressed. That gratitude wasn't the point. I told myself a lot of things that sounded reasonable because I wanted them to. By the time Claire turned 21, the routine was so quiet it felt permanent. I wasn't miserable. I just wasn't present in their lives as a person. I was the guy in the background paying for the lights to stay on while everyone sat in the bright room and acted like the electricity came from the walls. Looking back, the warning signs weren't dramatic. They were practical, like a loose bolt you ignore because the machine still runs, right up until the day it doesn't. I didn't feel anger after the toast. That surprised me more than the toast itself. Anger would have been familiar, even useful. It would have given me something to push against. Instead, what settled in was clarity, clean and oddly weightless, like a room after furniture has been removed. The drive home passed without commentary. Sarah stared out the window. Claire rode with her friends. I noticed how easy it was for everyone to separate, how little gravity I actually had in the picture. That realization didn't sting. It explained things. Over the next few days, moments began lining up on their own, like evidence that no longer needed persuasion. I replayed conversations I'd once dismissed as awkward or rushed. Requests that arrived without context. Decisions made without my input, followed by expectations that I would finance the outcome. I hadn't been consulted because consultation implies relevance. I wasn't needed as a person. I was needed as a function. Once that thought surfaced, it didn't provoke resistance. It simply took its place among the facts. I saw how introductions worked. "This is my mom," Claire would say. Or, "My mom and I were talking." I was never part of the sentence unless the sentence involved money, logistics, or a signature. I had been reduced to utilities, useful, invisible, and replaceable once disconnected. What struck me most was how long this arrangement had been in place without my noticing. Not because I was stupid, but because the system rewarded silence. Things stayed smooth as long as I didn't ask where I stood. The moment Claire made her wish public, the ambiguity collapsed. There was no misreading it. "No, we didn't mean it like that." Meaning had finally been stated clearly. I began to understand that my presence had always been conditional. As long as I absorbed costs and friction, I was tolerated. The second I required acknowledgement, I became inconvenient. That wasn't cruelty. It was structure. That clarity changed the texture of my days. I stopped scanning conversations for subtext. I stopped anticipating needs that hadn't been voiced. Not out of spite, but because I finally understood the terms. You don't negotiate belonging. You either have it, or you don't. And I didn't. Realizing that didn't hurt the way people imagine. It simplified things. When you know you're not part of the family, you stop trying to earn a seat at the table. You stop mistaking access for acceptance. You stop confusing responsibility with love. I didn't announce any of this. There was nothing to announce. The shift happened entirely inside me, quiet and irreversible. Like a switch flipped in a room no one else ever entered. After that night, I stopped trying to explain myself. There were moments when an explanation would have been easy. Sarah would mention logistics in passing, as if nothing had shifted. Claire would move through the house with the same confidence she'd always had, speaking as though the structure around her was permanent and unquestioned. Those were the moments when my old instinct would normally surface, the one that smoothed things over, clarified intentions, re-established my usefulness. That instinct went quiet. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't raise my voice or withdraw in any visible way. I kept my tone even. I showed up when expected. I answered questions directly, without elaboration. From the outside, nothing changed. If someone had been watching closely, they might have noticed I no longer volunteered solutions. But most people don't notice the absence of something they never valued. Internally, though, the decision had already been made. I wasn't going to argue for my place. I wasn't going to defend my intentions or justify the years I'd spent holding things together. Families don't require position papers. Belonging isn't something you negotiate once it's been revoked. The birthday toast hadn't embarrassed me, it had clarified the terms. I began to understand how much energy I'd spent maintaining equilibrium that only benefited other people. How often I'd stepped in before discomfort reached them. How rarely anyone had stepped toward me. That realization didn't make me bitter. It made me precise. I stopped asking questions that assumed shared responsibility. I stopped framing decisions as we. When Sarah talked about plans, I listened without inserting myself into the outcome. When Claire spoke with certainty about her future, I let her certainty stand on its own, unsupported by my reassurance. This wasn't punishment, it was alignment. There's a difference between withdrawing and disengaging. Withdrawal is reactive. Disengagement is deliberate. I wasn't retreating out of hurt. I was stepping out of a system that no longer recognized me as family. Systems don't respond to emotion. They respond to participation. And I was done participating. At night, lying awake, I didn't rehearse speeches or imagine confrontations. I thought in lists. Accounts, timelines, obligations that existed because I'd agreed to them, not because they were owed indefinitely. I wasn't angry enough to be reckless, and I wasn't sentimental enough to stay confused. The calm that settled over me felt unfamiliar at first. Not relief, clarity has a weight to it. But it was stable, grounded. For the first time in a long while, my internal state matched the reality around me. No pretending, no filling gaps no one acknowledged. I didn't need anyone else to understand my decision. Understanding wasn't required. Recognition had already been denied. All that remained was follow through. Once I stopped trying to fix anything, I had time to watch. Not in a dramatic way. I wasn't waiting for a collapse or looking for leverage. I just paid attention to what happened when I no longer filled in the empty spaces. The patterns became visible almost immediately. Sarah acted as if the birthday dinner had been an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than a declaration. She spoke carefully, choosing neutral language, smoothing edges before they could catch. She'd ask about my day in the same tone she used with coworkers she didn't want to offend. When she brought up Claire, it was always logistical, deadlines, needs, expectations, never emotional. As if emotion would imply something had gone wrong. Claire, on the other hand, didn't soften anything. She moved with a new confidence, the kind that comes from saying something out loud and discovering no one stops you. She spoke to me directly now, but without hesitation or courtesy. Her words carried the assumption that the structure around her was fixed, that my role was permanent even if my presence was unwanted. She behaved like someone who had already won an argument and couldn't understand why the other side was still in the room. What stood out most was what didn't happen. No one asked how I felt. No one checked whether the toast had landed the way it sounded. There was no attempt at clarification. No, that came out wrong. No effort to restore balance. Silence wasn't awkward to them. It was convenient. Silence meant nothing needed to be addressed. So I let it be silent. I noticed how Sarah would redirect conversations when they drifted too close to that night. How she'd mention groceries or schedules or weather. I noticed how Claire referred to my apartment and my car without qualifiers, as if ownership was a mood rather than a document. I noticed how easily both of them assumed continuity, that the systems supporting their lives were self-sustaining. Facts accumulated without effort. Tuition statements arrived like clockwork. Insurance renewals. Lease documents. Everything had a date and a name attached to it. None of it required confrontation. It just existed, waiting to be acknowledged. I didn't rush. Rushing would have suggested emotion. Emotion would have reopened negotiations that were already closed. Observation was enough. There's a kind of tension that comes from action, and another that comes from restraint. This was the second kind. Every day that passed without me stepping in made the imbalance more obvious. Not to them, at first. To me, I saw how much of their confidence relied on my silence being permanent. How little contingency planning existed once you removed the assumption of my participation. They weren't malicious. They were unprepared. There's a difference. By staying quiet, I wasn't escalating anything. I was allowing reality to surface on its own terms. Systems reveal themselves when you stop propping them up. People do too. I didn't need proof of intent. I had consistency. And consistency, over time, tells you exactly where you stand. I stayed calm. I stayed present. I watched. And the longer I watched, the clearer it became that nothing I did next would surprise them more than doing nothing at all. The moment things moved beyond my private space was the moment I stopped being the center of it. I didn't announce decisions or issue ultimatums. I simply disengaged from obligations that only existed because I actively maintained them. Lawyers came first, not because I wanted conflict, but because clarity matters when systems unwind. A short meeting. A longer list. Names, dates, documents. Nothing emotional. Just scope. Then came the university offices. Financial aid departments don't speak in feelings. They speak in balances and deadlines. I notified them of a change in sponsorship, filled out the required forms, and confirmed the effective dates. No accusations. No commentary. Just confirmation. The woman on the phone thanked me for being prompt. That's how systems respond when you're precise. The student dorm was the first place where reality surfaced without my involvement. Housing offices don't care about family dynamics. Payment clears or it doesn't. Once it didn't, notices went out automatically. Warnings. Grace periods. Timelines that existed long before Claire ever enrolled. What had been personal became procedural. I watched it unfold from a distance. Not hiding, just not intervening. I didn't call to smooth anything over. I didn't negotiate extensions or one more month. I let the system do what systems are designed to do when inputs stop arriving. It was strange, seeing how quickly everything reacted once my silence was interpreted as final. Accounts flagged, emails sent, processes initiated, all the things I used to intercept before they reached anyone else. The car was next. Title, insurance, registration, everything had my name on it. I followed the same approach. Paperwork submitted, appointments scheduled, no explanations attached. Vehicles don't belong to emotions. They belong to owners. The house followed, slowly and then all at once. Appraisals, listings, photos taken of rooms that had never really been mine, even though I paid for them. Watching strangers evaluate square footage and lighting felt oddly appropriate. Value assigned without sentiment. At no point did I feel like I was punishing anyone. Punishment implies intent to cause pain. This wasn't that. This was consequence without commentary. Structure asserting itself once I stopped absorbing the load. I noticed how quickly the narrative shifted once institutions got involved. What had been framed as a personal disagreement now required signatures, deposits, and compliance. There was no room for reinterpretation. Policies don't care what you meant to say at a birthday dinner. What surprised me most was how little effort it took once I stopped carrying everything alone. I'd assumed disengagement would require confrontation. It didn't. It required restraint. By the time the dorm issue reached its deadline, the situation no longer belonged to me. It had moved fully into public systems that operate whether you're ready or not. That was the turning point. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was irreversible. Once things enter that space, you don't argue. You respond, or you don't. And I didn't. Claire called first. Not immediately, but soon enough that the expectation was still intact. I was in my truck, parked outside a supply yard, engine off, paperwork on the passenger seat. Her name lit up the screen like nothing had changed. I let it ring twice before answering. "What the hell is going on?" she said, skipping any opening that might have softened the edge. Her voice wasn't hurt. It was sharp, irritated, accustomed to resistance giving way. "I just got an email from housing. They're saying my account is past due." I didn't rush to fill the space. Silence has weight when you don't rush it. "They can't do this," she continued. "Classes have already started. You can't just pull things without saying anything." "I didn't pull anything," I said. My voice sounded steady, even to me. I stopped participating. There was a pause. Short, but real. "What does that even mean?" "It means what it sounds like." Her breathing changed. I could hear the recalculation happening. "So this is because of dinner? You're really doing this over one comment?" I didn't correct her framing. Correcting it would have meant re-entering the argument. "You were clear," I said. "I listened." "That wasn't literal," she snapped. "You know that." I took it literally. Another pause, longer this time. "This is unbelievable. Mom said you'd calm down." "I am calm." She exhaled hard. "So what, you're just done? You're walking away and leaving me to deal with this?" "I'm not walking away," I said. "I already have." She hung up without saying goodbye. Sarah called an hour later. Her tone was different, measured, careful, the way people sound when they want to appear reasonable. "We need to talk," she said. "Like adults." "We did," I replied. "At the table." "That's not fair," she said quickly. "You know that's not what was meant." "It's what was said." She sighed, as if tired by my insistence on facts. Claire is young. She didn't understand the implications. I did. There was a long silence. I could hear traffic on her end. "So that's it?" she asked. "You're not going to help fix this?" "No." Not raised. Not angry. Just final. She started to say something else, then stopped. I imagined her realizing, for the first time, that the conversations she was trying to have no longer existed. That the role she was appealing to had already been vacated. We hung up politely. After that, there were no more calls. Just notifications. Deadlines. Messages from offices that didn't know my name beyond what was printed on forms. And for the first time, no one asked me to rescue anything. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was complete. Once I stepped out, things didn't stall. They accelerated. Deadlines have a way of doing that when no one intervenes. The dorm sent its second notice, then the final one. Language shifted from reminder to action required. Claire tried to negotiate extensions on her own. The system didn't care that this was new to her. It only cared that the numbers didn't match. The car became an issue next. Insurance lapsed the moment I stopped authorizing payment. Registration renewal hit a wall. A vehicle that had always just worked suddenly required proof, responsibility, and ownership. None of those could be improvised. I received a notification that it needed to be returned. I acknowledged it and scheduled the drop-off without commentary. The house followed its own timeline. Listing went live. Showings filled the calendar. Sarah didn't fight it at first. I think she assumed there would be time to renegotiate once discomfort set in. But markets don't wait for emotional readiness. Offers came in. Decisions had to be made. I didn't manage the process. I let professionals do what they do when the client doesn't interfere. The less I controlled, the smoother it moved. That surprised me. I'd spent years believing stability required my constant involvement. Turns out, it only required consistency. Claire's problems began stacking instead of resolving. One deadline triggered another. Missed payments cascaded into holds, then restrictions. Each issue was manageable in isolation. Together, they formed momentum she couldn't slow down. She texted once, not to apologize, to ask if I'd reconsider. I didn't respond. Reconsideration implies the original decision was uncertain. It wasn't. Sarah sent a longer message. She talked about history, about everything we'd built, about how families weather things. I read it twice, then archived it. The system we'd built had already chosen who it worked for. I was just acknowledging that choice. What struck me was how impersonal everything felt once it started moving. There were no villains, no dramatic confrontations, just processes executing exactly as designed. When support is removed, structures don't collapse immediately. They reveal what was carrying the load. I no longer tracked outcomes closely. I didn't need to. The chain reaction had its own logic now. One action led to another, independent of my attention. That was the point. Letting go of control didn't create chaos. It exposed it. By the time the final notices went out, there was nothing left for me to decide. The system was finishing what had been breaking quietly for years. And for the first time, that work wasn't mine. I moved away without ceremony. No goodbye dinner. No final conversation meant to tie things up neatly. I packed what was mine, signed what needed signing, and left the rest exactly where it stood. The house emptied faster than I expected once it was no longer pretending to be a home. Walls look different when you're not projecting a future onto them. I took a smaller place outside the city. Nothing dramatic. Quiet. Functional. Close enough to work that traffic stopped being something I planned my mood around. The first night there, I slept on a mattress on the floor and woke up without that low-level tension I'd grown used to carrying. No one needed anything from me. No decisions were pending. There was no triumph in that feeling. Just absence. I didn't check messages anymore. Not out of discipline. There simply weren't any worth checking. The systems that had been set in motion finished their work without my supervision. Accounts closed. Titles transferred. Responsibilities reassigned or dissolved. Life didn't pause to mark the transition. It adjusted. At work, nothing changed. If anything, things ran smoother. I was present in a way I hadn't been in years, because my attention wasn't split between obligations that never acknowledged me. Problems stayed professional. Solutions stayed contained. I went home at the end of the day and didn't carry anyone else's uncertainty with me. I thought I might feel regret, or guilt, or the urge to explain myself once the dust settled. None of that arrived. What I felt was proportion. My involvement in their lives had always been larger than my place in them. Removing myself corrected that imbalance. I understood then that leaving wasn't abandonment. Abandonment implies a duty that was ignored. What I'd done was step out of a role that was never mutual. You can't abandon a structure that already excludes you. I didn't follow updates. I didn't ask mutual acquaintances for news. Distance wasn't something I imposed. It was something that happened naturally once I stopped holding the center together. Without me, there was nothing to orbit. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was stable, earned. For the first time in years, my time belonged to me. My money did too. More importantly, my attention was no longer spent maintaining a version of myself that only existed to be useful. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like I'd exited something that had been over long before anyone said it out loud. Life didn't reset itself. It continued. The same mornings. The same work boots by the door. The same drive, only quieter. What changed wasn't the shape of my days, but the weight they carried. I no longer felt the need to justify my usefulness or anticipate someone else's instability. My choices stopped echoing into rooms where I wasn't welcome. Claire got what she asked for. Complete separation. No interference. No presence. No support disguised as obligation. I don't know how she framed it afterward, and I don't need to. Freedom doesn't come with instructions. You find out what it costs once you're holding it. I got something too, though I didn't ask for it at the table. I learned the difference between being needed and being valued. Between responsibility and belonging. Between silence that preserves peace and silence that erases you. Those distinctions don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves slowly, once you stop pretending they don't matter. I don't replay the night in my head anymore. It served its purpose. It named the truth out loud so I didn't have to keep translating it in private. Some moments exist only to end things cleanly. There's no bitterness in that. Just accuracy. I live smaller now, but nothing feels missing. My stability isn't borrowed against someone else's expectations. My calm isn't conditional. When I close the door at night, it stays closed. Claire wished me gone. She got her wish. The difference is that I understand exactly what that kind of freedom costs, and who ends up paying it.